honor. I said, I'm very pleased to see so many people that I went to school with, old, not old, former neighbors from out by the store. Ron Waddles is here, and I worked with him at Rochester Schools. I've got my former mother-in-law, Gail Kemmler. I've got my cousins by marriage from Dale. So I said, I guess I've lived a charmed life. First of all, this is where I grew up. We moved here in 1946. My dad bought the store, and we put the apartment on later, but we had a house, a small house that was attached to the back here of the store.
Where was it?
It was on the corner of Avon and John R. It was called Paul's Market. And I also have a picture here of my days when I learned to swim at Saltwater Pool. And the instructor is Art Cox.
Oh my gosh.
So he did this in the summertime. So Art just passed away a couple of years, and he's been a friend all this time. Okay.
Katie, how long did you have the store? How long did that go?
My dad bought it in 1946, and he sold it in 1964. So I worked there until I got married in 1961. So I grew up pumping gas, doing all that good stuff. I was born April the 13th, which was Easter Sunday, in Howell, Michigan. So and then we moved to Rochester. And my dad had 4 sisters, and he had 3 sisters. And his oldest sister, Rose, and Claire Howe owned the store when he bought it. And their daughter, Peggy, who married Bob Federley, were running the store when my dad bought it. So the store was open 7 days a week. We had groceries, gas. We had an oil ramp, a metal ramp that you would drive your car up on so that you could change your oil underneath it. My mother had an antique store. After a while, we had a pay telephone in the store, and we did not have a house phone. I don't even remember when we got a phone in the house, but the back door of the back of the store where the house was attached, and it was all enclosed. So if people called, we told them, make the phone ring for a long time, because we've got to, come out, go through the store to answer the phone. So it was big time when we got our own phone number. We sold kerosene. We had beer and wine. And at that time, we had to redo the back of the store because we went from out of the store building into the house. And with beer and wine, you couldn't have the house attached to the store. So my dad had to put a partition in that room. So we had to go out the store, go outside, turn around and come right back in the door right next to it to come into the house. Like I say, we were open 7 days a week. New Year's was always New Year's Day. We did a full store inventory, which, like I said, we had to do it every year. My mother would set it at a card table in the middle of the store, and my dad and I would go to each take one end of the store and go through, count everything and yell it out, and she'd put it on a chart that she'd made. And it was a long day, and some very good customers and friends of ours, Mr. and Mrs. Cagle. They were both from the South, and they would make a nice Southern dinner and bring it down to us every year so that we could eat while we were working. We delivered groceries. We had a charge sheet for customers. They would charge their groceries all week and come in on Friday and pay. we had, the whole neighborhood was an extended family, and I just forgot to mention Patty. Patty Snover grew up in the neighborhood, so. And we knew a lot about all of their lives. We shared their happiness, we shared their sorrow. And a couple times, my dad, some of the customers that we had were going on vacation. He would give them his credit card in case they had any emergencies that occurred on their trip. I said, you wouldn't see a merchant doing that. The mini store was built in 1952 by Al Toussaint, and Al's wife Edith Toussaint, who worked at Doris Hayes' store for years. Edith bowled on my dad's team, and they used to have big banquets where the husbands and wives all went and got dressed up, and they had centerpieces. Well, Al came down one day and asked my dad if he had an orange crate. Didn't tell him why he wanted it or anything. When my mother and dad got to the banquet, this was sitting on the table, and it's the same on both sides, and it was even lit. So I've cherished that. In fact, Tom Douglas just had it last year and took it all apart and put the windows back in and fixed the doors and cleaned it all up for me. So I said it's a real treasure since the store was tore down 2 years ago. We had newspapers that were dropped off for the paper boys at the corner. So there was always a lot of boys hanging around the store waiting for their papers to show up. And years ago, my dad had to go down, he ordered our groceries from Lee and Katie's, which was down on 8 Mile Road. So when he didn't have time to go down and pick it up, he would tell him, after I got my driver's license, he'd say, okay, Kate, take the truck and go down and pick up an order. Well, I always had a paper boy around, so they'd always go down with me and help me load the truck and unload it. And when my mother and dad wanted to take a vacation, my older sister Betty used to come over and we'd run the store. And then we had, I'd have neighbors that would come in and help, like Walt Haynack, who just passed away, and he was married to Margaret Guthrie. He would come in and cut meat for me, because I could grind hamburger, and I could sell the meat, but I couldn't chop up, because we'd get a half a cow in at a time, or a hind quarter, or whatever. And we had a lot of the neighborhood kids that worked in the store, like Dr. Ed Hendershot worked for us, and Harry Shamer worked for us when he worked after I got married in '61. He would work, and when my mother and dad wanted to go someplace, and he ran the store all by himself. And we never bought a new car. We found a guy that worked for Ford's, and when he had to get a new car, we got in touch with him, and he'd sell us his old car, because my dad always believed that if we had a brand new car sitting in the driveway, that people would say, oh, they don't need our money, we'll go someplace else. And I remember one time the police were parking in our parking lot, and my dad, it happened once, and he kind of let it go, and the next time it happened, he went out and told the officer, he said, you're not good for business. He said, if people say, oh, we're not going by that corner because the cops are always sitting in the parking lot. And so the police officer took it, and he didn't move, and they never came back and parked. But they used to, when I was out on a date, especially Jerry Cannon, who was a Rochester policeman, and I never knew what he was doing out in my area, but he'd always pull up behind us in the car, in the driveway and flash his lights at us. So I said I grew up with a lot of big brothers around. We had a good understanding, good relationship with our salespeople. We had Lyle from Farmer Pete's, and we went through his adoption process with his child. I don't know if any of you remember Jack Harris. He worked for Armours. And I think the name of the program, TV program that he got on, he was a singer, and it was Chance of a Lifetime. And it was done in Detroit, where people would come in and sing, and he did do some recordings after that. And there was Joe from Tasty Bread. Then Grandpa, it was Land O'Lakes Butter, I called him Grandpa Harger, and I used to go out and help him unload the truck and bring in the food. And one year for Christmas, he gave me a sterling silver teaspoon. And that started my interest in starting to get my place settings. So by the time Dale and I got married, I had 11 place settings in my sterling silver. And I'd get a couple dollars, and I picked it out at Lake Jewelers and my pattern. And I'd go down every couple of weeks and give Lloyd a couple dollars. And by the time I had enough money, he'd order me a place setting. So that was a good investment. We went to George Green on Pine Street. That was where the ice house was, and he also sold eggs. So we went there to pick eggs up. We spent a lot of time down to Rochester packing with the Gruners, and we'd go in the back door, and Dad would always go find the raw hot dogs, and we'd eat hot dogs as we were walking around picking up groceries, or we would go to the smokehouse and get sausage, get beef sticks out of there. And then Niall Winkler was our potato chip man, and he spent a lot of time at the store. They lived just down the hill, and his wife would have to call him every once in a while and remind him it was time to come home to eat. But he'd go get a couple bags of potato chips out of the truck and tear them open, and we'd lay them on the counter, and we'd all sit there and eat potato chips and talk. So I went to Avon School, which was just down the road. It was a 4-room schoolhouse, but one room was used for storage, and there were grades kindergarten through 6th there, but we were in 3 rooms, so all of the teachers taught multiple grades. And Mrs. Moss was my kindergarten teacher. Mrs. Miller was, I forgot what grade level they were, but I had Mrs. Moss, Mrs. Miller, and Bob McKinney. And we used to walk to Bloomer State Park for our end of the year school parties. And my first love was a classmate, Gordon Muckenhern, and he used to make me pictures. But instead of giving them to me, he would put them in the mailbox as we walked home from school. Well, my dad would get the mail. So, Halloween was always a favorite time in the neighborhood because we always knew where to go for the best treats. Who had the candied apples, who had the popcorn balls, who had the fudge, who had the cider and donuts. So that was always a good time. And when my dad decided to build the apartment, it was just a one-bedroom apartment, but we had newlyweds there. George and Peg Hesketh was our first renters, and he was the manager of the Edison company when you'd go in and turn your light bulbs in and get new bulbs and take all your electric equipment in to be fixed. Don and Karen Yakey Seed, they lived there right after they were married. Ron Peeney and Diane Ungren ran the Rochester Food Center. And Bob Chrisman and his wife, first wife, lived there. And Bob worked for Joe Deaton for years. And excuse me. Then when Joe gave up the gas stations, and he went to work for the DPW. 7th grade was moved to the administration building, or the Rochester High School at that time, now the administration building. We had study hall. First time we had to deal with lockers and combinations. We had to walk to Hallback Field for gym. We had dances on the tennis court, which is now the parking lot. Halloween Day in 1956, we cleaned out our lockers and walked up to the new high school. Had a great big parade of kids walking the street. I was in student council in the football bleachers. We had a bond sale when those were built, and I sold the most bonds to help pay for that. So they brought me out on the field and recognized me for my efforts. And I just noticed yesterday when I went by that they've tore all the bleachers down and tore the ticket booth building down. So they're doing a lot of renovations up there. And our senior trip, we went to New York City by train. Ray Lawson was our senior sponsor. And Ray has only missed one of our class reunions. And he's the last living teacher that I've had. So the things that I grew up with were loving parents. I was very spoiled because I had 2 brothers and a sister, but there was 13 years difference between my sister and I. And I said, my dad always named me the brat. But he built me a tree house. I had a horse, Bing, and I had to go to the people that I was buying the horse from and learn how to clean out the stalls. We had a dog. We had fox terriers, and my mother used to breed them, so we had puppies quite a bit. I had a hamster. I had Pete the pigeon. My dad had chickens, and we sold eggs. And then when the renters moved out of the apartment, I got to have PJ parties up there. Because I said our house wasn't big enough. We only had 2 bedrooms and a living room, dining room, and kitchen. I learned to drive very young. I used to sit on my dad's lap and steer the car. And then when I got a little bit bigger, I used to sit beside him and steer. And we had a cottage over on Woodall Lake off Sashabo. So we'd go over there after the store was closed and stay there for the night and then get up in the morning and drive back. And so that's when I practiced my driving. My dad had a old Ford truck, and I don't know if it was a Model A or a Model T, but he drove it out in front of the store to get the gas, and he looked at me and he said, okay, go put it in the yard. So I had to learn how to stick shift, and so you can just imagine how many times I stalled that truck. But I got it back out there. I still love to drive. And I'll drive anywhere, anything. My brother worked for Hess Cartage and drove an 18-wheeler, and he stopped to visit one time just before I was in driver's training, but I didn't have I don't think we even had to have permits back then. But anyway, he said, come on, let's go for a ride. So I got to drive this cab, an 18-wheeler. Now I drive 513 miles to see my significant other in Ottawa, Canada, and we spend the winters in Florida. I was in a car rodeo at SS Kresge Shopping Center, and I got the prize for being the best parker of the day. And I said that was due to Merv Mack, who was a teacher at Rochester High School, and also my driver's training teacher. I got to eat acid-free tomatoes before they were available to the public, because Mr. Cush lived kitty corner from the store. excuse me, and he worked at Ferrymore Seed, and so he used to bring tomatoes home and give them to me. I was in Job's Daughters. I was Queen of Job's Daughters, honored queen in 1956, and we used to go to the Panlin Hotel up in Grand Rapids to conventions every year, and that was always a lot of fun to meet the girls from other Bethels. I was very fortunate to have a lot of adopted aunts and uncles. I said, back then we couldn't call people by their first name, so they were always Aunt so-and-so and Uncle so-and-so. Helen Hendershot taught me to knit. She was a neighbor. I had worked when I wasn't working at the store, for Christmas holiday one year, I worked at Kresge's, and I'm still good friends with the assistant manager of the store. His name was Harold Eglert, and he married Joyce Cagle. I was the first year at Oakland University, which was really Michigan State at the time. And then when I decided I didn't like college life, I went to work at NBD. Then I got married, and I had to quit when I was 3 months pregnant because you couldn't be pregnant and work for the bank. I ended up with 3 children. I have Kathy, and she has a daughter, Jamie, and she just got married now in February. And I have one grandson, Chris. My daughter, Laura, has 2 girls, Kate and Erin. And my son, Bill, has 1 daughter, Lucy. And the grandkids run from 7 years old to 30 years old. I don't know how that happened. I also worked at Lake Jewelers, and I worked at Cliffview Apartments, and I worked 26 years at Rochester Community Schools as a secretary, and I started out at Ruther, and then I moved to administration, was in special ed, and then I went to Brooklands, and I was lucky enough to be secretary when Brad Keselowski was a student there. He's a NASCAR guy. And then I moved to grounds and maintenance out by Hart, and I spent my last 10 years there. I love to travel now in England, Germany. When I was in Germany, my daughter worked for NATO, and so I got an inside tour of NATO, which not a lot of people get. I've been to Bermuda, St. Croix, Mexico. Go to Canada a lot now. I still have the northern states yet. I haven't hit too many of those, but there's still time, I hope. As I said, I learned to swim at saltwater pool, and I think I've lived a very pleasant life, and I've had a lot of good things happen to me. I said, Rochester has changed, and not to my way of liking, but they call it progress. North Hill was 2 lanes. I think Main Street was angle parking. I'd been on the bridge just a couple hours before it dropped. Snake Trail was a place for kids to hang out, and there was a wooden bridge to get to Snake Trail, and there was 1 light on the top of the bridge because it was a one-car bridge at a time, so you had to watch out for other people. There were homes on 2nd Street before they were all tore down. The corner of there was lots of open land. Our store was the only thing on Avon and John R. Well, there was one house right across the street from us where McKay's lived, but now that's all built up with, there's shops and condos on the other side, and there's also a new store that hasn't been rented. Like I said, I think I've been very lucky to have grown older here in Rochester, and thanks to my friends and all the wonderful people that I've met. Any questions? Gail? Gail?
The only thing I can think of that you forgot was your neighbor down the road there, Margie Coker, and the dance lessons in their basement.
Yes, Gail and I danced together way back then. Dan?
The corner that your store was on Avon and John R., is that the corner where they built that new facility?
Yes, it is.
That's empty.
It hasn't been rented.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. I said that there's too many windows in that for most stores. I said they wanted to make it like a 7-Eleven thing. I went to Rochester Hills Council when they talked about it, and they wanted it open 24/7.
When was the year that was built, the original one?
I don't know. I know that when my dad put the Paul's Market sign up, that when we had to tear off some of the facing, it let's see, was the Blue something cafe. So it was a cafe at first.
That was in the 40s.
Before, yeah,
So it's probably in the 30s sometime.
at least. I've been always going to go over to City Hall or go over to Oakland County and find out when it was built. So,
You mentioned Guthrie's. Were they living just down into the subdivision off of John R?
Wilcox.
That they had a strawberry farm?
the best strawberries in town.
We used to go over, my folks always went to the Guthrie's to
Yeah.
get our strawberries that my mother froze and made jam with.
Frank always used to bring in strawberries, like especially just before it was going to rain. So they were always very, very clean and good. And I remember one time he came in and this addition that we had, there was a window there, and we used to keep the window open all the time. And Frank would come in and put at least 2 quarts of strawberries there. One time I ate all of them. And I ended up with the hives. June?
Hey, where's the snake trail? I've heard of it, but I don't know where it is.
Well, it was Bloomer, before Bloomer Road, though. It was down, you had to go down First Street, or Second Street. Yeah.
South River.
And,
Diversion, the South Streets.
yeah. But the kids all used to hang out there and then,
Curved like a snake.
yeah.
Go down by Byers and get.
No, it wasn't down that far, but I think that it eventually became Elizabeth Street, didn't it? Because there was no houses. It was a gravel pit. They were in there taking gravel out of it. Yeah.
I remember as a kid when we'd been to my grandparents here in Rochester and we were trying to go home and we'd had one of our famous ice storms. Well, you couldn't get up South Hill. It was way too slick. And my dad had tried several times. Finally backed down, took diversion, and then went on what I call Bloomer Road and got home easily that way to Utica. Just by using the back roads.
Yeah. Well, and there was stories too, and I don't remember it back that far, but people had to back up South Hill
Yes,
because of
right.
the gas would.
The gas would go to the back and the engine would starve them.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sure I'm the only one that doesn't know what a saltwater pool is, but can you tell me, like, if that was in Michigan and why you would have something like that? Or
I don't know why we had it, but it was on Rochester Road and Long Lake Road. And it had, it was all enclosed, I mean around the pool, it was, open on the top. And they had changing rooms or lockers on 3 sides of it. They had 2 diving boards, a regular one and a high one that I was made to jump off of. But it was salt water.
what was the point of the salt water?
Anybody know? Gail?
No, I just wondered if you had a bus to go to school in or if you walked.
I walked to North Hill. I walked to Avon.
2.5 miles.
No. We were only a half a mile.
I mean, the high school.
Yeah, no, we had a bus.
Oh,
Yep, yep, and we would always end up going down, or John R., and then going down Bloomer. And, two of the girls over there lived down there.
Would that be Carmichael's bus?
Yes. Yep. But I don't know why saltwater pool was saltwater. Margaret?
I think today the saltwater pools are an option, they're a heavy chlorinated pool. because
Right.
Some of the senior centers that have pools
Yes.
are
Yeah.
saltwater.
I know that I have a friend out in Arizona and they have a saltwater pool, so they don't have to use all the chlorine. And I guess it's more economical too. So, but like I said, it was there and then they tore it down and there's a shopping center in there now. It was on the northwest side of Long Lake.
Thank you.
Pat?
I'd like to remember back in 1952, my husband and I got engaged, and Mrs. Seed was his landlady down on Walnut. You remember Chuck Seed's mother? Yes. He ran the newspaper, the Clarion, and she had a bedroom upstairs that she rented to my husband in 1949 when he was working at National Twist Drill. And she had to invite me over so she could look over who my husband was gonna marry, and I thought that was pretty cute, and she took such an interest in him. And she had to check out his fiance.
Yeah, well, I said, I lived next door for 32 years to Sam Howlett on Romeo and Parkdale. And he was chief of police, and then he went to Crittenden Hospital, and then he went to National Twist Drill.
He was all over.
Yeah, I said, we used to eat ice cream one of us would have dessert at night. I said, we solved a lot of current problems on that. Yes.
Where was your elementary school?
It's Ace now, but it was right at the end of, or the beginning of School Road.
School road, yeah. School road,
And,
John R.
yeah, they just added on to it, I don't know, the last bond issue. So I said, I want to stop in there to go through it because it's, like I say, it was only 4 rooms when I was there.
This is minute 2.
Well, thank you very much for listening.